From the perspective of faith, we can in some way see Jesus Christ as the strongest person who ever lived. And at the same time, through eyes of faith, we can see Jesus as the most vulnerable human being that ever lived. We probably often see those as contradictory terms: strength, vulnerability. And yet we see in the passion of Jesus Christ how they come together for him and for us. That Jesus had the strength to be vulnerable. He had the strength to be open to love wherever love took him. He had the strength, and yet he struggled at times in that strength, to be open to being denied, being scoffed at, being betrayed, being abandoned, all of that. Vulnerable enough to let that happen without shutting down and saying, I'm not going to love anymore. And as we look at his vulnerability, certainly that comes out especially in Mark's gospel. Right away, think about the Last Supper. It was actually a Passover meal. That was meant to be a high point in Jewish faith. The Passover, when they remembered Moses, through God, leading the people out of Egypt. And it was to be an evening of solidarity, an evening of celebration with family and friends. And at that very evening, Jesus knew when it should be a coming together beautifully in unity. He knew that one of them would betray him with a kiss. And he also knew that Peter, even though Peter objected, would deny him 3 times. Can we even begin to imagine what that had to be like for Jesus? A time that should have been so good, and yet was so painful and sorrowful. And we know that he called his disciples then to go out and pray with him. And here in Mark's gospel especially, because it's the oldest gospel, Mark is really pointing out the full humanity of Jesus that we hear in that reading today from Philippians. He emptied himself and took the form of a slave. He emptied himself of any God sense, of any of that. He was human in that way like us, and yet called to trust in his Father, and yet at times struggle like we do. And when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, Mark uses some strong language that we don't probably pick up fully. It's not the same in the other gospel accounts. He says that Jesus was troubled and distressed, and that he said aloud, my soul is sorrowful to death. That whole sense right then, it was meant to express the deep agony that Jesus was in. The deep sorrow, the deep stress that he was going through. And of course, we see that vulnerability. He's willing to take it and keep going. But also, understandably, he comes before his Father in prayer. And going through all of that, says, Father, Abba, if it's your will, please take this cup away from me. This really is too much. It hurts. I'm fearful. I'm struggling. Can you take it away? But then, in the midst of that struggle, the faith to be able to say, but not my will, your will be done. And God's will, as Jesus came to understand, wasn't for Jesus to simply die, and that's it, make up for the sins of humanity. But God's, the Father's will for him was to love to the point of death. To love, even though love would hurt him, would create deep sorrow in him, would pain him. Not only we think of his physical pain, but his emotional and spiritual pain, even going on then. And he continued to love anyway. Because his Father's will for him and for us is to always love. Jesus could have gone to resentment. Jesus could have gone to anger. Jesus could have gone to a lot of things. But at that time, he was sad, he was struggling, he was hurting, and he continued on. And we see that as he goes through that, he's brought to the cross. And think about this, and these words are only in Mark's gospel too, because the different gospel writers emphasize different points. But in Mark's gospel, Jesus, right near the end, as he's on that cross, as he's hanging there, talk about vulnerable, At some point he says, my God, why have you abandoned me? He felt that. And understandably, in his humanness, why? Well, all his friends abandoned him. They dispersed. They disappeared, all but John. And so in that humanness, he did feel deeply abandoned, and for that moment feeling, I don't know if you're there either, God, Abba. This hurts. You know, some of the greatest pain that any of us can have, even when we're going through struggle, is loneliness. Loneliness. Abandonment. That's what he felt for us. And we know that, yes, he felt that way, and he went through that struggle, as any of us do often when we suffer out of love. But he didn't stay in that. Through that prayer, through that struggle, he was able, in another gospel it mentions, he was able to say, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. I've been struggling. I feel as though you're not here, but I know in my deepest heart and soul you are here. Receive me. I need you. Let me experience your presence, your healing, your being with me. Jesus needed to know his Father was with him, even when he had that experience of great abandonment. And so as we look at that, you know, often we emphasize again the physical pain of Jesus, but that emotional and spiritual pain probably ran even deeper. And for us, for starters, as we come in this Holy Week, to appreciate what the Lord has done for us and is doing for us. For every one of us. Because at times we probably deny him or betray him or don't reflect on the will he calls us to. And he chooses to love us anyway. And he chooses to remind us when we go through, and we all do sooner or later, pain and loss out of wanting to love. Then yes, love leaves us vulnerable, and well it should. And at the same time, then we come to that inner strength that Jesus showed us that he wants to give us to be able to deal with that love and keep on going. We all have a choice to make. When we hurt, we can shut down and put our distance. Or when we hurt, we can open up to God and show even greater love. And so today, let's take that quiet moment and see, wow, Lord, you've done so much for me, and well, I don't know if I thank you that much, or I don't know if I'm that grateful the way I ought to be. And then, Lord, at the same time, help me, help each of us to have the strength to be vulnerable to love. Take a quiet moment and see what the Spirit may be saying to each of your hearts. God bless you.